All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott. I've been coming at you with some JavaScript, courtesy of Muroc's JavaScript 2nd edition. And I'm not sure exactly where I left off last time, but this seems like a pretty good place to start. So, regardless, that's where I am going to start. So let's take a look at some more things about arrays, and then we'll eventually go into web storage. So, if you look right here, it's very simple to do a sort. All right, and actually an alphanumeric sort or an alphabetic sort is much easier to do than a numeric sort. You notice that with an alphanumeric, or really an alphabetic sort, all you have to do is say the name of the array dot sort paren paren. That's it. All right, and you can see exactly what happens. I do believe, I could be mistaken on this, but I do believe there is no reverse sort, but there is a reverse. So if you want to put, basically if I wanted this to be Linus, Grace, Charles, Alan, Ada, I would do names.sort like we have right here. Then in the next line I would say names.reverse. Now it is a little bit different when you are sorting a numeric array, all right, because you have to literally call a function. And what this function is going to do is it's going to compare the two values and swap them on an as-needed type of basis. Now there is a really good explanation of this. JavaScript numeric sort, and it is under W3 schools. I'm going to guess that that's it. Well, that gives the same thing, but someplace in here it actually explained it. And it's very interesting because earlier what I had done is I had done a few programs in here, and one of the programs that I had done was using finding the largest value and the smallest value in an array. Well, here's how to sort the array in ascending order. If I change that A minus B to B minus A, I get a sort in descending order. If I do this and I grab the first one, let's see, where is it? So if I grab literally the first item in the array, now I get the highest number if I do a descending sort. If I want the lowest sort and I do an ascending sort and grab the first number, I can get that. So they've got a lot of stuff in here. And again, this is on W3 Schools, which I've mentioned before, and it's always a nice site to go and find out very basic type of information about just about anything. And there it is. All right, let's continue on then. There's the reverse method, which I mentioned to you earlier. Now, how to use the join and the toString methods. There are just so many different available JavaScript array functions. It's almost impossible to get to all of them, but they show you some examples here. Notice that if you use join, all right, what you end up getting in this case is it says names.join. Well, alert names.join. It displays everything, and by default, I believe it puts the comma between them, but nothing else. Notice here we've done the same thing, but we said join them with a comma and a space, so it looks a little nicer. All right, the toString method is important, and you do have to kind of recognize and realize what's going on there. Sometimes you're working with an array, but it's easier to use some of the string functions. So you can take an array and do the .toString on it and turn it into a string. But you can also go in the reverse, because sometimes you're working with a string and you want to be able to use array functions. So you can go back and forth between them. In addition, the European Computer Manufacturer Association, Script 5, has come up with even more methods that you are able to use with this stuff. And this is on 272 and 273 in the book, but there's a lot of different methods that you can use. All right. Most of them, as mentioned here, have a very similar type of syntax. The every and some, again, the best thing I can tell you on this is to literally just take a look at what's out there before you decide that you want to go and write your own functions, which is never a bad thing. You might want to just check and see if there already is some kind of a routine written that's similar to what you want to use. All right, here's a for each method. Kind of interesting because notice in here, we can do this, or we can do something like this. All right, where we're going to call it. So again, there are always all sorts of different ways of doing the same thing. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess you can kind of come in there and draw your own conclusions. I happen to think it's a good thing. All right, and again, they're just going through and showing some more in here. All right, I want to jump ahead just a little bit here and talk about what's referred to as an associative array. And this may be your first foray into this, but just so you know, with an associative array allows you, rather than to have a numerically referenced array, all right, it allows you to have a non-numeric referenced array. And if you might look at that and go, well, that's sure, Jeff, clear as mud. So let's take a look at an example. All right, get rid of some of the stuff I've got open here. So let's say that I was going to come in here and I was going to write a very simple little HTML file. I should really write this as a template file and then just save it someplace, but so I've got my head section. I'll put a title in here and we'll call this associative array example. All right, and I'll come in here and I'll put in a script tag. And then I'll end my script tag. Now, let's suppose that I was going to have 5 different states, and then I was going to create an array called Midwest. So I'm going to say Midwest equal var Midwest equals, remember I can do it like that, and that's going to create a brand new array. Okay? Then I can say Midwest 0, we'll say equal Wisconsin. Midwest 1 equal Illinois. Midwest 2 equal Michigan. Midwest 3 equals Minnesota. And we'll put one more in. Midwest 4 equal, who do we have in there? Ohio, which probably really isn't that much of a Midwest state, but you get the idea. So I can keep adding states like this. The problem is, now I have to remember that 0 is Wisconsin, that 1 is Illinois, that 2 is Michigan, etc., which is kind of a pain in the butt to do. So what I can do if I want to is I can change this. I'm going to keep this here, but I'm going to make a couple changes to it just so you can see what's going on. All right, I'll call this Midwest 2. All right. So this is a numerically indexed array, but here I can come in here and I can do this. Hopefully already, as I'm starting to go through this, you're looking at it and you're going, wow, I can see where that would be handy. And personally, I think it is. So the difference between these, and you can see it on your screen right here, is how you reference the array. So rather than numerical indexes, I can index using a string, which typically makes this much easier to work with. Now, we're going to go over the example that was in the PowerPoints in just a second, but I think showing it to you like this hopefully really highlights what the differences are. Now, in here where they show you the differences, and there's nothing at all wrong with their example, but notice item code 1, 2, 3, item name, HTML5, etc. All right, and again, why is that big a thing? It's not, except that I can now say item, if I want to show, for example, the item's cost, rather than having to remember that it is the 0, 1 second element, or number 2 element, I can say it's the item cost element. That's what you get out of using an associative array. All right, more than anything else, it's much easier to work, you know, and especially when you are working with databases, because what you can do is you can use the key, all right, the key field for the data field of the database field. Sorry, I gotta take a phone call. All right, I'm going to apologize in advance. There are people upstairs at my house and it's a little bit loud in here. So if you hear background noise, I apologize in advance. Here's an example of how to both retrieve and display the elements in an associative array. So in here, they've set everything. And in here, they're displaying it. But again, the idea behind this is what you hopefully are seeing is what you're using in here is rather than using numerical indexes, you're using a string that can more viably represent exactly what it is you're working with. Another example of using it inside of a for in loop. All right, how to use an array of arrays, which typically in most other languages you call a multi-dimension array, and this is 278 and 279 in your book. You store arrays in each element of another array. JavaScript, they mention on page 279, doesn't technically provide for multi-dimensional arrays, but you can create an array of arrays, which is really the same thing. The arrays within an array can be regular arrays or associative arrays. Now, this gets to be a little hinky when you start to display the things that are in here. All right. All right. So there are some examples on page 279. You see them on the screen here. To refer to the element in an array of arrays, you use the 2 index values for each element. The first is for the element in the primary array. The second is for the one basically in the secondary array. You can nest arrays beyond 2 dimensions, but a lot of times people don't do that just because of the fact that typically if it's hard to literally fathom how something looks, a lot of times people don't like to create something that's like that. So most of us can imagine, at least, you know, whether you're going to a movie, and a 3D movie or whatever, you can imagine 3D, but most people can't imagine more than that. All right, because it's just the kind of world that we live in. All right, let's finish up the chapter. So I'm on page 280 here, and they start talking about web storage here. And on 281, the author defines web storage as something that lets the web page use JavaScript to store data in key value pairs. It's currently supported by every modern browser. So in the past, you basically had to use cookies to store data on the user's system. but that meant that the data had to be processed by server-side code. It also meant that you were somewhat limited because most computers will only allow 20 to 40 cookies, and most cookies can only be about 4K. That's about 4,000 bytes. But modern browsers allow you to use web storage. All right, the web storage can be processed by JavaScript on the browser, so there's no need to get the server involved. Not only that, web storage can store approximately 5 meg of data. When you use web storage, you're either going to use local storage or session storage. The difference between these is that local storage can persist between browser sessions, but items in session storage are removed automatically when the browser session ends. All right, typically when the user closes his or her browser. So web storage is meant to be accessed by JavaScript and not by server-side code. So it isn't passed to the server with each HTTP request. The HTML5 spec recommends a storage limit of 5 meg for this. So they start showing here how this can be used. So you use the local storage and the session storage objects. They store their items in what are called name-value pairs. Then you use set item, get item, remove item, and clear to work with these objects. All right. The set item requires 2 parameters that provide the name of the item and a value for it. All right, so you can see an example in there. In the book on the middle of page 280, where they're using it to set an email and they're using it to set a phone. All right, after you've set it, you can use a get to grab that information. So again, to refer to web storage with or from JavaScript, you use the local storage or session storage object. Now, when you look at the example right here, they're showing hit counters. Maybe you've seen this kind of thing before, but typically when you're talking about a hit counter like this, what they're basically saying is every time someone goes and visits a site, you'll add 1 to a counter to tell how many hits or how many viewers have been made. Now, this is a really, really simple hit counter, because if I have my own hit counter that I have on the system, and let's say it hits 50. Well, if I'm going to write it like this, all right, it's probably going to be a lot harder for me to figure out, was it one person going to the site 50 times, or 50 different people each going to the site once, or somewhere in between? All right. So here's some of that terminology again that we talked about. If you want to, and they show this in the book, this is on 282 and 283, the author mentions sometimes as you test an application that uses local storage or session storage, it might be helpful to see what values are currently being stored, and that's what they're showing you in here. So what you can do is you can use what's called the resource panel of the Chrome browser developer tools. Remember, you bring those up by hitting your F12 function key. But if you do that and you click on the resources tab, so again, if I hit F12, I've got to have a browser up. So if I have a browser up here and I hit F12, my F12 key, that brings it up right here. There we go. All right. And then I have to click on the resources tab. And once you do that, where is my resources tab? Sources. Well, I'm not sure where the resources tab is in here, but it's supposed to be one of the things that are in here. Stack, inspector, open developer tools and click on the resources tab. Well, I can't find it right now, but if you do that, if you open up the developer tools by clicking F12 and you click on the resources tab, I guess you have to find it first, there is an arrow beside local storage or session storage, and you can expand that section and then click on a website URL, and what that will do is it will show you all the name value pairs that have been set for that particular example. Okay? Sorry, I couldn't be any more help right there. Now, what the chapter ends with, starting on 284 and going all the way through 289, so about the last 6 pages, is they use a task manager application. This is an excellent app. In fact, what I've done historically is I've had students build this app in several different languages, including Android and including iOS, just so they can get used to using this. So the app displays the tasks that the user adds to a task list in a text area on the right hand side of the page. So as you come in and you add a task in here and you click add task, it puts it in here. When you click clear tasks, it clears this area out. So the task list in this example is stored in local storage. This means that the task list is saved when the user closes the browser tab or window. So when they reopen it, the current task list will be displayed. So the HTML for this really isn't very hard. It's shown right here. And again, the HTML that you see here on page 50, or on the slide here, is what gives you this. And this is all the CSS, which just basically says to center it. All right, not much more. So again, the Task Manager app lets the user build a list of tasks to be done. It stores them in local storage and it displays them in a text area. You can add new tasks to the list or clear tasks. The tasks are all stored in local storage in key value pairs, with tasks as the name and the value as the tasks in one string, and pipes that are used as separators. So the actual JavaScript for this is shown in the next several slides, but they start showing it here on page 287. Again, the app keeps tasks in local storage in a string, and each string is separated by a pipe sign. To display the tasks, it then retrieves the tasks string from local storage, uses the split method to create an array of tasks. And to store the string for the tasks in local storage, it uses the join method to put them back together again. And you see that on the next several slides here. Also, what's used in here is they put an ECMAScript 5 enhancement in here at the very end. All right, so now notice we've got toggle, sort, set name, and filter tasks. This version capitalizes the first letter of each task before displaying it to the browser. All right, and it's going to do that so that we're able to toggle these and put them into an alphabetic order if indeed that's what we want to do. So again, there were 2 main topics that were discussed in this chapter. Those were arrays and web storage. You were just introduced to both. Remember, arrays store one or more elements, and we talked about numerically indexed arrays We talked a little bit about an associative array, which uses strings for the indices rather than numbers. Finally, we ended up by talking a little bit about web storage and their two different types. Local storage, which remains indefinitely in the computer, and session storage, which is lost when the browser session ends. Both cases, the data is stored in name-value pairs. All right, in the next chapter, into Chapter 10, we will go into how to create and use functions. So I'll be back with that chapter shortly.